Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans Virtual Conversation. I'd like to say that the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans are an equal opportunity provider for all candidates and representatives, regardless of who, what, or where they are. Our purpose is to educate and inform. Anyone is welcome to participate in a New Jersey Constitutional Republicans Virtual Conversation, which is a new format for us and available to all. Thank you very much, Rik. Rik Mehta is here with us today. It's great to have you to join our conversation. Thank you very much, Rik. How are you doing today?
It's my pleasure, JR. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you. And tell our audience, Rik, a little bit about you as a person and give us a nice, concise bio, if you will, please.
All right. I'll try to keep it concise for you. So I'm Dr. Rik Mehta running for United States Senate. Look, my story started 50 years ago when my father came here to this country legally. He only had $100 in his pocket, and we always had to work hard. And I always open with that because it's important to know that my story is much like everyone in New Jersey. Hard work, humble beginnings, and the belief that the American dream is available to anyone willing to chase it. And chase it is exactly what I did. I went to pharmacy school right here in New Jersey at Rutgers School of Pharmacy. It's where I met my beautiful wife, Rima, who's also a pharmacist. And I ended up putting myself through law school while working overnights at the hospital. I worked at Robert Wood Johnson Hospital for a number of years. And after law school, I went to the FDA starting under the Bush administration, where I was an officer. And I enforced against pharmaceutical companies involved with taking out a lot of our unapproved opioid drugs that have caused and contributed to the opioid epidemic we've had. And then after that, I came back private sector and worked mostly in the regulatory innovation space and medical innovation. My background being a pharmacist, I am fortunate to own a couple of businesses now. I'm a small business owner. And I'll tell you, I'll end on the most important part of my bio. I got three beautiful little gentlemen that we raised right here in Morris County.
Well, that's great, Rik. Thank you so much for that. And I think it's very interesting, and I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit on the fact that you are indeed a lawyer and a professor. And we believe, the Constitutional Republicans believe, that there is a need for constitutional literacy among candidates and the ability for them to correctly articulate the purpose of the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the structure of the Constitution, Rik, with its enumerated responsibilities attributed to government. So what that looks like for a United States Senator, as you want to be, is a thorough and in-depth knowledge of Article 1 and Section 8 of the Constitution. So please give us a little background on your career as a lawyer and a professor.
Yeah, happy to. So JR, there's no more important time than now when our constitutional rights continue to be impinged upon than to have statesmen and women who truly understand the Constitution, its original intent, and to more importantly, fight to protect the document as was written for all Americans. I'm a law professor at Georgetown University Law School, where I teach health law and regulation. Now, and we see, the use of health to impinge upon our constitutional rights. A lot of it is surrounded about at what basis can you use health as far as the class that I teach.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you for that. One of the initial conversations that we had, Rik, when we first met one another was talking about the 17th Amendment. And of course, repealing the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment, repealing it, which would end the direct election of the United States senators and return the power of appointing senators to state legislatures. Right now, Rik, Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, and Elizabeth elect the Bookers and the Melendezes, if you will, who have no presence whatsoever apart from these cities throughout all of New Jersey. Repeal would give those outside the most populated areas an opportunity to have a United States senator who is familiar with the whole state and therefore far better equipped to be a representative of the people of New Jersey in Washington, D.C. Better to provide an opportunity for our Republican legislators, Rik, that are in the State House in Trenton to select a senator rather than the isolated special interests of the sectarian Democrats. So please give me your thoughts on the repeal of the 17th Amendment.
Yeah, it's a good conversational piece to have. And, JR, for the longest time, for many years, it's been a bit of a pedagogical discussion, given that the 17th Amendment passed many years ago now, took away the original founders' intent, which was to have an indirect election, right? So the original intent of the founders were to say, well, the House is voted by and for the people, which oftentimes was more of a folks that represented the people, but may not have been sort of the statesmen and women that you would expect in the Senate. And it's interesting because what I find the most disturbing right now is that even within the Senate, which is meant to be a little bit more of an educated body of men and women who really focus on writing the laws of which is meant to be representative of the people to keep a fair checks and balances, are no longer happening. I mean, you see that right now with Cory Booker. Not one senator is involved with writing a piece of legislation, right? It's more special interest groups. That's one thing you'll find different with me. When I get to the Senate, I'll be rolling up my sleeves, working and reviewing every single piece of legislation that goes onto my desk. And never mind the fact that special interest groups and lobbyists off K Street work on these legislations. The fact is, Cory Booker has missed more than 65% of the vote. So to your original question, I think it's no longer pedagogical. I think it's come to the point where we do need to have a discussion whether we repeal the 17th Amendment and go back to the original founders' intent. Now, I'm not sure if the outcome would be different, in terms of would we, the two of us, be even having this conversation of me being a United States Senate candidate. But I agree with you that the concentration of populism in terms of the inner city areas or areas, never mind inner city, of concentrated population is not representative of the state. Whereas when you have an indirect election with the state legislators choosing who they want represented in the Senate, that's when I think you have a more representative view of a statewide approach. And that's the original intent that the founders had in mind. The other half of it is, and originally why the 17th Amendment was passed had to do with the fact that there was bribery and corruption. Now, New Jersey being a very corrupt state to begin with, I don't think we had the tools back then that we do now to safeguard and protect against a fair election. And, not to go off on a tangent, but I can tell you right now, even a statewide election for US Senate is going to be fraught with fraud. And I'm concerned about, Governor Murphy's edict through executive order by creating an all vote by mail without voter ID and other safeguards to put in place to protect the political process. So to your question, yes, it's time we revisit the repealing of the 17th Amendment and make the original intent of the founders of the US Senate to be men and women that are elected by the state legislator, and those that have the class and the sort of standards that you would expect in reviewing and writing laws and legislation to protect against special interests.
Thank you very much, Rik. And as you know, the states are deeply reliant on federal funds to meet their financial obligations. Senators chosen by the state legislatures may mean more money would likely flow down to the states with fewer strings attached. And that alone would mark a significant rebalancing of power between the states and the federal government, which of course is, we're seeing a revitalization of federalism, if you will, Rik. And in focusing on the 17th Amendment as we do, it plays an educative function and the American public, teaching the American public about the important role that the founders intended state governments to play within the federal government. So thank you very much for that, Rik. And now I'd like to move on to a discussion, or to a topic rather, Rik, that we could probably spend the rest of the day on. And that would be the considerable amount of problems with the Senate, whether it be too much power given the Senate leader. Former Majority Leader Harry Reid was made famous for twisting the rules of the Senate, blocking debate, blocking amendments, and systematically disenfranchising hundreds of millions of Americans from political representation. Ignoring federal law and not submitting to adhering to a required budget is another big problem. Laws are written by lobbyists rather than legislatures. The size and complexity of the bills are too large. Add-ons and special interest expenditures, unnecessary appropriations, reliance on stimulus, bailouts, and quantitative easing, discretionary spending, and no regard for increased national debt. So there you have it, Rik. What do we have to do to get things in the right order?
Well, and I think we kind of touched upon this, right? A lot has to do with the fact that, there is too much special interest groups that are corrupting the legislative process of rulemaking, of lawmaking, right? That's got to be step one. I think we also have to make sure that our constituents are educated about the importance of the political process and get more people involved. And the first step is to get out the vote. Right now, we're also, as I mentioned before, being challenged because I think the governor is disenfranchising voters by creating edicts of vote by mail without explanation of what the process is, explanation of what party affiliation would be, and taking advantage of his rule of the process that's going to affect voters and constituents. And so, look, there's a lot we need to do to start to roll up our sleeves. But the first thing I think, and really the most important thing, is to get men and women that are not being manipulated by special interests, the ones that want to roll up their sleeves, get to work and actually work on laws that matter for the people. You won't find that with your current sitting senators. Cory Booker is nowhere to be found. First of all, like I said, he's missed 65% of the votes. He doesn't care about the people of New Jersey. And Bob Menendez, well, we already know his slimy, corrupt ties. And I hate to say it, but probably the reason he won had to do with the special interest connections he's already been making or has made over his history as senator. Whereas Cory Booker, he's a junior senator. He didn't have as many connections, right? So he's never really been more vulnerable. And so, I think in order to get to the point where we need to get to, where we have free, fair elections that protect the political process, we need to just increase people's understanding of, who stands for what and, where we're going to go. The other thing is we also need to protect our checks and balances. I think that, we can't have a bloated government. And going back to your original point about federalism, a lot of the power was and should be concentrated in the states. We have a United States, and I think people forget that what that exactly means. It means you are united by the states, and many countries understand the word state to actually be countries. And the original founding fathers also felt that sort of these are states that are united but operate independently as separate countries. And so I think when you move back towards that, put the onus on the states to balance their budgets, reduce your reliance on federal government grants, and start to rebuild what I think is going to be our next future of economic prosperity. No, more important time than to do that now in the crux of this pandemic about what our future economic viability is going to be than now. And I think states need to take on that responsibility further.
Right. Thank you, Rik. And one of your potential colleagues, Senator Mike Lee from Utah, had written an op-ed a couple of years ago called "The 5 Steps to Restore Trust, Transparency, and Empowerment, and How to Fix Congress." And he says that first, and we really can truly understand this and observe this, that first there's the still strained relationship between the GOP's Washington establishment and its grassroots conservative base, which of course you could consider the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans. And amongst the people, the greatest challenge to policymaking today, Rik, is distrust. The American people distrust their government and Congress in particular. And for their part, Washington policymakers seem to distrust the people. And the distrust that now exists between grassroots conservative activists and the elected Republican leaders can be particularly toxic. Another thing, anti-cronyism, as we've talked about with the special interest that you've brought up, Rik, anti-cronyism legislation is a win-win for the Republican Party, restoring growth and fairness to an economy that big government and big business have rigged against the little guy. And politically, it would be better for us to restore our initial principles, Rik, and going back to representing the middle-class American, and while penning hypocritical Democrats between their egalitarian talking points and their elitist agenda. So what do you think about those remarks that your hopefully future compatriot Mike Lee said?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think Mike Lee was ahead of his time when he wrote his sort of simple, keep it simple plan here. And he's absolutely right. I mean, like I said, I can't highlight enough the fact that cronyism has created mistrust and distrust among the people. It's a time where we need to bring the legislative process back to the people so that they understand, and more importantly, that we know that the elected officials should be working for the people, not for special interest, is exactly what we need to do. The other thing, and Mike Lee has been, I think, right on, is that we also have an exorbitant debt problem, right? And I think people forget and look past the fact that, our spending problem is out of control. And this should be alarming because our own currency could be potentially devalued. And so until we get to the point now with this pandemic and the trillions of dollars of spending, what will a fiscal reform bill look like in the coming years? How will we balance our budget and do this without raising taxes so that we can empower people, so that we can work towards the future of making sure that people have economic freedoms and viability. Like I said, my story started 50 years ago when my father came here. We didn't come here nor receive handouts to get to the point where we got to. And the more we can move people off government subsidies, the more we can empower ingenuity and innovation back into our country. And you see that with a lot of the legal immigrants that come here, and maybe why they espouse so many of our, at least my conservative views towards rulemaking.
Right. Yes, and Rik, I find it absolutely incredible that we haven't had an actual budget for many, many years. And we need to bring back, and hopefully you'll be able to bring back a budget and work from it rather than discretionary spending and continuing resolutions. So it's very important. And federal law requires that the Congress adhere to a budget. And the other thing too, Rik, is that whatever does get funding, it needs to be fixed. I mean, I'm sure there are many, we're loaded with administrative and bureaucratical agencies that unfortunately the Congress has empowered over the last century, if you will. And these administrative agencies are able to act autonomously from the control of representative government, which you and your fellow colleagues in the House of Representatives provide the people. And it's important for the legislative branch to take more role in cutting expenditures where they need to be cutting, or fixing and making more efficient these administrative bureaucracies so that they're able to work as they were originally intended, with the hope one day, Rik, of actually eliminating the need for these administrative agencies and giving you as a senator and the House of Representatives members more control and more power in legislating.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that if you don't mind, real quick.
Certainly.
As you mentioned, the Interstate Commerce Clause actually gives the regulatory power of products, the control of the legislative process. So the legislative branch actually controls goods, and over the years, we've delegated those authorities, creating sort of the pseudo fourth branch of government through administrative agencies. Yes. Expanded growth, and administrative agencies continue to be protected against the political process. There's no better way of a checks and balance system than through our political process. And for those that may not understand what that means, that simply means your right to vote in who you want or vote out who you don't want. And if you have bureaucrats like Anthony Fauci or whomever within these administrative agencies, they're insulated from that political process. The people cannot vote them in, and then they cannot vote them out. Now, there are going to be administrative agencies that we need because we know the legislative branch is not comprised of all disciplines and, with the growth and advent of products. But to your exact point, it's time to pare that back and pare back a lot of the superfluous spending that's gone on over the years, basically creating economies within itself of government subsidies and government funding. And that's inappropriate. That's when you can transfer the power back to the people where it belongs. So I'm a strong believer of privatizing a lot of the services.
Very good. That's good to hear. And let's talk about Obamacare, Rik, or the Affordable Care Act. Now, the current administration has eliminated the individual mandate. States are allowed to add work requirements now to Medicaid. Cost sharing reduction subsidies to insurers have ended. Access to short-term called skinny plans, unquote, have been expanded. Funds to facilitate healthcare.gov signups have been slashed. However, supporters of the ACA say insurance premiums have gone up as a result. Now, what are some of your ideas that would either, of course, there was talk that there would be a full repeal, which never got done. Many of the Republicans that were elected in 2014, 2016 were given the mandate, they thought a mandate by the American public to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. However, there are people who now at one time were not insured, are able to be insured. But what are some of your ideas? Is it fixing specific problems, like giving the insurance companies the ability to compete with one another, regardless of state? Give us your ideas on that, Rik.
Yeah, and JR, I'm glad you mentioned this, because this will be probably one of the #1 most important issues that is going to face both the president and the Senate and the House. So Congress and the president will have to tackle this, especially and because of the pandemic really furthering the needle on this one. And so, look, I think we all believe that there's no constitutional right to healthcare. And of course, we need to work to ensure that as many people as possible have access to high quality, affordable medical care, and that people with pre-existing conditions are protected. But we can't do that at the expense of quality care and innovation. And we know that one of the biggest issues with the, sort of so-called, you mentioned Affordable Care Act, is that it wasn't affordable at all. The massive expansion really of government control of healthcare really made it less affordable for millions of people who are forced to purchase specific insurance plans that they or their family didn't want, while flat out forcing people to lose their employment-based health insurance, despite the false and now infamous promise from then President Obama that claimed anybody who liked their healthcare could keep it. That simply wasn't true, right?
No.
So now we've seen I think this year a couple months ago, marked the 10-year anniversary of Obamacare. And it's high time that we take advantage we stop the nonsense and start to take advantage of the fact that we know now that it didn't work. So, in addition to raising taxes on New Jersey families to pay for it, really Obamacare set out to punish people by the individual mandate, right? Effectively allowing government to charge a tax penalty on people and pressure them to comply. Unfortunately, the full weight of those penalties have been eroded over time via exemptions, really, and getting rid of that. But we can't let that happen. So the first step, we have to look at the regulatory mess that Obamacare created, right? You talk to doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and others, and they know that, 50% of them have been burned out of their jobs, and a lot has to do with electronic health record keeping. You are basically injecting the government into the decision-making process that should be held between patients and physicians. And honestly, JR, we can talk about this for the next hour and a half. There's not going to be a quick answer on this, but instead of taking these lessons and figuring out how to make the system better and lowering prices through increased competition or more domestic manufacturing, increasingly socialist Democrats like Cory Booker are now pushing to put Obamacare on steroids and forcing Medicare for all down our throats. Now, can you imagine? They've taken a system that we know didn't work and want to expand on that, rather than, calling a mulligan and saying, hey, it didn't work, let's scrap it and start over. So now we're looking at a $30 to $40 trillion expenditure, never mind the amount of trillions of dollars that have gone on to, in terms of fiscal stimulus from the pandemic over a 10-year period. And Cory Booker just doubled down on his Medicare for All socialist program just the other day. I can tell you from a healthcare professional perspective, our quality of care will significantly suffer.
No question about it. Well, thank you for that, Rik. And I'd like to talk about another topic that you're going to be able to speak expertly to. And that would be, Rik, the current pandemic has clearly identified the need for America to begin, and especially the New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York areas, to begin to manufacture pharmaceuticals and get off of the dependence on communist China for our pharmaceuticals. And of course, the tested and tried policy, the historical policy of the Whigs, and then what became the Republican policy of tariffs, is they're waiting to be implemented again to protect American manufacturing. And it's not just pharmaceuticals, which I want you to speak to, Rik, but really we need to manufacture in the United States again. The other evening, my wife and I were looking for sneakers to buy, and we were looking to see where sneakers were made. And there's not one company that exclusively makes sneakers in the United States. New Balance comes the closest to it. But we need to manufacture again. And of course, the devastating effects of NAFTA signed during the Clinton administration has had a detrimental effect on our ability to maintain a proper and a good balance between import and export expenditures. But talk to us about the pharmaceuticals and why we need to manufacture them in the United States.
Yeah, well, you set it up very nicely, and I'll tell you, I couldn't agree more with you here. I got another challenge for you, JR. And I appreciate you sharing your anecdote about looking for sneakers. Ask your pharmacist, hopefully you don't need medicine, but next time you do, ask your pharmacist, hey, where was my medicine made? And now this is a big issue, and this is probably one of the main priorities of my platform, is to make sure we focus on things. Now, medicine is critical, right? It's not even so much that everything has gone overseas. The price of drugs are very high, but the fact is that this pandemic has highlighted that we have a national security risk at our hands. We see an over-reliance on manufacturing. 72% of our source ingredients come from China or foreign countries. And that's got to end. And so the reason I ask you that challenge is because unlike your sneakers or the shirt that I'm wearing, you can't find a country of origin label on any of your medicines. You don't know. The supply chain has become closed doors, and we need more transparency around where our source ingredients come from. There's no doubt that I support the Trump administration's push to make America first and move our manufacturing back to America. And specifically, as the next US Senator, fight for those jobs to come back to New Jersey. Under the Obama administration, more than double our medical manufacturing of manufacturing firms opened up in China, while most of ours shuttered here. Over here, and you'll see on the bottle, you pick up a bottle even over the counter of drugs, they'll say, where it's located, but those are office buildings. It'll be the principal place of business or wherever it is, but it's not necessarily where it was manufactured, right? The made in label is not there. And that's critical. So we need to push for making sure that our manufacturing jobs come back to America. We need to create incentive programs. This is not by fiat or dictate. Those that are essential, we need to focus on right now because it's a national security interest. The rest needs to be governed on free market principles. I have a policy proposals that we can do. Let's focus on incentive programs on those firms to come back to the United States. When you look at innovation, America leads innovation. Right now, we're very fortunate to have really intelligent men and women, scientists and researchers that are working on cures to the disease or whatever that's going to help us either fight this pandemic and focus. Let's not forget that, right now we've been a single public health issued country or state because of the Murphy administration's short-sightedness. But we're not, we have multiple different public health issues. We have cancer and the opioid crisis. None of that has gone away. So right now, there's no more critical time. And that's why the campaign I launched is called the Made in America Medicines campaign, to bring those jobs that China stole from us back to New Jersey.
Very good, Rik. And one more issue I'd like to discuss and then turn it over to you to inform the audience of anything that you would like to share with them. And that would be an issue that's very important to the constitutional Republican movement, and that is the Second Amendment. Now, we've seen incremental infringements placed upon the Second Amendment in New Jersey for many years. We have a dear member by the name of Mark Cheeseman who has a lawsuit before the Supreme Court and keeps getting kicked down the road. Hopefully they're going to take up the case, but it's challenging what we know is an unconstitutional justifiable need standard in New Jersey for a person to be able to carry a firearm on their person away from their home. So give me your thoughts. So last year, the HR 38 was a bill that was reintroduced in the House of Representatives. And of course, with Nancy Pelosi in charge, it wasn't going to go anywhere, but it was called the HR 38 Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2019. But give me your views on the Second Amendment and especially the justifiable need statute in New Jersey, Rik.
Yeah. Look, right now, as I mentioned, all of our constitutional rights are under attack, right? There's no doubt that we need to pass, right to carry laws in order for people to carry their weapons across state lines. The problem is is that the Democrats continue to focus on bad actors versus good actors. They have a tendency to look at doomsday versus the good in people. And that's what I find so troubling. If you actually look at the reason the Second Amendment was written, it's to make sure that you have a well-armed militia to protect against government overreach. And now, you know, the Democrats will use any tool in their playbook to encroach on the Second Amendment. The one that continues to creep up is what we see right now. It's the use of this term public health or health in order to impinge upon the other rights. And I'll tell you right now, the case law does not support this sort of free-for-all impingement on constitutional rights. And so that's why we can't look at, we can't couch issues such as gun violence, right? There's violence done by guns, there's violence done by other things, there's violence done by cars, there's violence done by many things. You got to look at the mental state of people, and you got to treat that as separating out what the tool is being used. And if there's any tool that's the most protected in our constitutional rights, it's guns. And so to your point, I think we, in President Trump's next term, I think you're going to start to see that the Republicans will focus on the good of people, those that are law-abiding citizens that know how to and will and can use, express their rights of freedoms and to own guns. And so I'll be very supportive of those legislations. I think it's great to hear, Mr. Cheeseman's work against that and to continue to push for protecting our constitutional rights. And, he knows that he has a partner in me with that.
Very good. And I just wanted to, before we conclude, Rik, I want to say that it's quite obvious, especially in South Jersey, that the Democrats, the leading Democrats in the state and in the federal government, they don't show down here. They don't come to Cumberland County. They don't come to Salem County. They don't go to Cape May County. They don't go to any of these counties, whereas Republicans like yourself are engaging with all the counties throughout the state. And it's important for those independent voters out there, Rik, to realize that the Republicans are going out there and that you're meeting and you're discussing these issues and talking about representative government, where the Democrats are completely incubated amongst those who they support. And it's all driven by those who believe in their social justice agenda. And we believe that the social justice agenda is discriminatory in itself. And it's important for people to note and realize that men like yourself and other Republican candidates and ladies are going about the state and bringing forth those initial Republican principles that the constitutional Republicans are helping to reform within the party. So just give me a comment on what you think about the fact that, like economic mobility, which we believe in as Republicans, we also believe in the mobility of getting out and meeting the voters.
Absolutely. And there's no more important time to recognize that we need a senator that's going to be statewide representative. And as you may know, my roots started in South Jersey. My grandparents, when they first immigrated, my mother's side of the family settled down in Camden County in Cherry Hill. And that's where they planted their roots. That's where they lived, and that's where they passed away. We have a lot of family up and down the state. And so representative, at the end of the day, we're all New Jerseyans. And it's unfortunate right now that we only have 2 sitting US senators that only represent the north part of our state. And to your original point when we started the conversation, has a lot to do with because of populism and other reasons why. So right now, this is why there's no more important time for whether you're in South Jersey, North Jersey, Central Jersey, to really rise up and get involved in the political process. You too can make a difference in who you select and who you vote for. And so let's not let them disenfranchise us in our vote. You have not just a commitment from me, but a promise that I am and will be a representative of the entire state.
Great. Rik, I'd like to give you the opportunity now to address the audience and tell them, inform them what you would like to before we conclude the broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, JR, thanks. As I mentioned before, right now, our governor has passed a vote by mail edict. And so I'll encourage everyone, when they get their vote by mail ballots in the mail, to vote for Rik Mehta. Rik Mehta is the guy who's going to represent the US Senate in the interest of New Jerseyans, and we're going to make New Jersey a place to live, not lead. You'll find intelligence and commitment and authenticity in my style of leadership. And I will be fighting for the people of New Jersey who are now suffering. So many small businesses that have been put out. My business affects me personally. And we're going to be fighting for our economic recovery. So go to rikfornj.com, RIKFORNJ.com to learn more about me. And again, when you see Rik Mehta, vote down the ballot. I've been endorsed by 17 of the counties out of 21 in New Jersey, and I'm very proud to be on the ballot with President Donald Trump. I think we're going to have a very exciting election year, and you're going to see a lot of changes once Cory Booker is out of office for the benefit of New Jerseyans.
Well, Rik, I want to thank you very much for joining me today for this virtual conversation. I hope you'll come back prior to the primary and discuss these issues with the voters of New Jersey. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Tonight at 7 o'clock, we will be joined by CD2 Republican congressional candidate Bob Patterson again at 7 o'clock. So we'll see you then for that. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Rik, especially thank you to you for joining us today. And thank you. And remember that the Constitutional Republican movement is moving forward, and we believe in liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you.